Hello and welcome back to Logical Magic, Examining Esoterica. Hey guys, today I have one of those topics that we don't like to think that we do it, but we all pretty much do it when we're caught in cyclical behaviors. And that is, why do we self-sabotage? What are the kind of mechanics behind it in our subconscious? What are we doing? And it's such a common thing, and people have such a hard time understanding what in the world would cause them to repeat a pattern that didn't give them the results they were hoping for in the first place. And there are multiple things behind it, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But today, hey, Jacob Fluharty is my friend, on a break for a little bit because he was dealing with some of his own stuff, but I'm super glad to have him back. And he's joining me today to help talk about this topic. I'm going to do the housekeeping at the top of it because I'm supposed to, so that people will listen to it. I'm Alane. You can find me at therisingmoon.com to book me for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session. You can find me at Cronecast at the Rising Moon on YouTube. Logical Magic, Examining Esoterica is the podcast. And of course, I have a Patreon with Monday through Friday daily tarot draws that give spiritual and healing advice. If you want to join that, it's going to be linked in the episode notes or in the description box down below. And you can find Jacob at SouthernStyleReadings at Facebook.com, or you can also find him at SouthernStyleReadings at gmail.com. He's a very good reader as well, and he does some remote reading as well. So check him out. I highly recommend his services. Hey, Jacob, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm like a little bit tired from doing a little bit too much this weekend, but other than that,
Yeah.
which, that's my opening volley on the what do I do to self-sabotage? Because the first step is understanding your pattern. One of the reasons that we self-sabotage, what are your views on this? Let's go to Jacob first. What are your views on self-sabotage?
That I'm really, really good at it. Despite years of trying to fight against it. I don't know. It's one of those, like, I don't want to call it a compulsion, but it feels like one sometimes, where it's like things get to be too good, and then that's unfamiliar territory. So we got to mess it up, right?
Yeah, and what I do is that I do ever increasing amounts of almost anything. Because
Hmm.
I don't actually have addiction issues. It took me a really, really long time to figure out that it's like, oh, it's in the compulsion family. Because I can catch myself doing things, I put a halt to it and I don't go back to things. So it's why I had a really hard time thinking of myself as having an addictive personality. But what I finally came to realize over the course of time is that I do things, I'm always in a contest with myself to do more and to do more and to do more. And my easiest
Hmm.
example of this is I took up hiking about 5, 6 months ago. And I've always been pretty fit because I've worked out my entire adult life. And so the physical aspects of it came really, really easily to me. And I've been trying to rehab a permanent injury that has to do with balance. And so hiking was ideal for me. And then I noticed that I kept increasing the amount I was doing and kept increasing the amount I was doing and kept increasing the amount I was doing until 4 months into, being into hiking, I came home, looked up the trail that I had taken on a whim on All Trails. I looked it up on All Trails. That's the app that has all the information on the reviews of a trail that I took that I'd already done some ones that were marked as hard. And I already knew that part, that it was like, okay, that is a little like, that's taken things pretty far when you're doing things that are marked by people who are, avid hikers as being hard. And I came home and I saw one that I had just done a hike and I knew it was really hard, that multiple people with a lot of experience were recommending against, because
Hmm.
I'm always trying to do more and I'm always trying to do more. And I was aware while I was out there, it's the Tri Peaks Trail up by Danielson Monument. If anybody in the area is like, what's the trail? What's the trail? It's the Tri Peaks Trail. And on All Trails, it's a lot of people recommending that, like, hey, it's a lot of technical hiking. It's really for an expert level, that like it's going to be a lot of trench hiking. There's a lot of things down on the trail, and that was all trail. And I was aware while I was doing it that it was like, this feels like it's a little dangerous because I carry exactly one trekking pole with me to help with water crossings or to
Hmm.
help with balance occasionally, but I don't let it touch the ground for the most part because I'm trying to rehab my balance. And that was when I had to confront that that's a form of self-sabotage, is with my ever like goalpost moving in what I'm trying to achieve. I couldn't just do hiking because it's pretty and I enjoyed it. I had to turn it into a form of perfectionism or something that I was pursuing and something that I was increasing, because I started out doing like 4, 5, 6 miles. And like by the time I caught what I was doing, I was at 13, 14 in a day, that's a
Mhm.
lot for somebody like who's got a permanent injury and does all my hiking alone, which is the other thing that it's like you are genuinely engaging in behavior that could endanger you.
Right.
Because I'm always seeing helicopters up there extracting people who have made mistakes. So I'm very aware that it can have some peril with it. But that's one form of self-sabotage, is always pursuing more, never enjoying what is there, having difficulty being in the present moment. Jacob, what are some of your forms of self-sabotage? And we are going to get to the reason we do this, because there's actually a really, like, it's one of those, oh, that makes perfect sense reasons. But we want to go into a little bit of what self-sabotage constitutes for different people, because it's not necessarily what you think. Like, you wouldn't think of like ever increasing goals in fitness being self-sabotage. By the way, I have a weightlifter's elbow right now because of the exact same thing. I started
Mhm.
different upper body moves that I was doing despite having a really good, and now I have tendonitis in my elbow that I'm having a really hard time getting rid of, but it comes from the exact same thing, is that I can
Mhm.
never say I have done enough. I'm always trying to do more. And it's a form of workaholism, and I had carried it over to my hobbies. And there is a reason that,
Right.
and I will get to that in a moment, but let's talk about how you self-sabotage.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to default to the one that is that I'm always talking about, is that drug and alcohol addiction that keeps crawling back up. Because I'll go a couple of months and everything's fine. I'm in one of those phases right now, actually,
Yeah.
where I have not drank. I don't know, probably. I mean, I've like had a drink here and there, but like I haven't gone out and done anything like that for almost 7 weeks now, if not 2 months. And so like everything's been going really good. I've noticed that I will throw myself into work in a way that is really unhealthy as well, which is what I'm doing currently. So your timing couldn't be any better. Um, so yeah, no, I mean, so like I think yesterday I clocked out with like 60 hours for the week, and I mean, I say that it's self-sabotage just because it takes me away from like the people and the things in my life that, like are important to me and that usually keep me grounded. And so when I don't have those things anymore, it allows me to like fall down that slippery slope a little bit faster, right?
Right. And it's also the thing that it pulls your life out of balance, that we are meant to be
Mhm.
productive, but we are meant to maintain a robust health, work-life balance where like your casual and personal pursuits take an equal importance within your life. We live in a culture
Mhm.
that tells us like, you got to go to the grind, you got to try, all ever increasing. If you're not making money, you're failing. And
Right.
that is not actually what a successful life feels like. In a successful life, you would ideally be happy. And like when you're wearing yourself down to a nub, which is what you're talking about, is that you do the exact same thing. You take everything to extremes. Is that when you
Right.
start something, it's like a ball that gains momentum and is rolling down a very steep hill into that valley, and I do the exact same thing. So why do we do it? And it's an interesting thing because there are multiple reasons, but one of them is that as human beings, we fear change and we repeat things in
Mhm.
cycles. And see, so we do things in cyclical patterns, which you're going to uniquely understand because you have bipolar disorder that functions with cycles a great deal, these ever repeating energy signatures. So that's one of them. We get caught in a cycle. We don't break our patterns unless we apply awareness to it. So it is about self-sabotage, can be take many forms, and it can be less destructive than you might think, because let's face it, leaping up and down a mountain with like a fairly agile body is not normally considered a form of self-destruction. But if I'm not able to recognize my limitations, I am going to end up being one of those people being airlifted by one of the Ventura County Sheriff's Department helicopters that I'm always seeing up there. I'm going to be being airlifted with a broken ankle if I'm not careful. And that's what we're talking about, is being able to recognize our healthy limitations. But if you have had a pattern of substance abuse to escape internal pain, which is part of what's gone on in your life and part of what's gone in my life as well, then you will repeat it in other areas of your life. And the only real hope of breaking those patterns is to be aware, to have that greater perspective, stepping outside of yourself. Why am I doing that? And there's another reason with it, and I'm going to go a little bit more into it. I did a bunch of research for this. I frequently do a bunch of research for the things that we're talking about. And there are magical reasons behind this as well. I need you to understand something. If you're trying to manifest something, if you like to do magic, you are actually trying to compel energy. You're trying to compel energy into the shape, into the form, into the return that you desire. But with compulsion and being able to compel are besties. They are so closely related that if you don't keep an eye on it, that same energy that you're trying to create, that ever increasing manifestation, will turn inwards on you and become the thing that you are then compelled. And so again, awareness is the thing that gets us out of these patterns, but you have to be able to watch what you're doing. Be careful, kind of monitor yourself to be like, yes, I am doing this. And I choose with my logical mind to break these subconscious patterns that tell me that if some is good, more is better. And if more is better, then even more still will be great. And eventually you're like the last hike that I did that was so hard, and I backed off and started doing them at a more comfortable level. I was so tired getting to the car that it was like an optical illusion, that it looked like the car kept moving farther away, because I was like, I'm coming, car. Oh my God, please. Oh, why does it look farther away? Because I was that tired. I really was that tired. And had I overdone it? Yeah, I did. I didn't pay too badly for it, but it was that moment of clarity around the, hey, look what you're doing. Even a healthy thing can get turned into something that turns against you. And that is what self-sabotage can be as well. Because it's easy to spot self-sabotage when we're talking about fully toxic things. But if you're prone to it with toxic things, then you have to watch the rest of your life for the if some is good, more is better of it all, which can include isolation, which can include never talking to people, but constantly reading, reading from sun up to sundown, and not having that be a varied energy. The cure for self-sabotage is to be aware that you need to maintain a varied energy and to break your patterns. And that's one of the things that we do it. But there is a very specific reason behind why we do it. Jacob, can you give me any examples in your past where you became aware of something and it helped you break it? Because mine was the hiking thing.
I mean, I can use the work example just because it's something that I have recently been trying to be more cognizant of, because that's when things really start to fall apart in my relationships, most notably. And it led to a lot of issues in my marriage. And so whenever I noticed that I was falling into the same patterns again here recently, I was like, okay, so now I need to take the time to do this little check-in and kind of see what's going on. I mean, I am just now coming out of a really weird and depressive episode, so that's been going on for a couple of weeks. So it's all just kind of been coming out of that, and then realizing that I was I wasn't throwing myself to the bottle, but to capitalism with here we it's time to do something, make a change. And so yeah, I don't know, I've just become a lot better at noticing my patterns, especially since I've started journaling again. That's been really helpful. It's easier to go back and see them when they're on paper.
Okay, and what you're referring to is actually a form of emotional escapism, which is what I was doing too. Is that people who have this compulsion energy, which again, if you can manifest, you have the ability to compel energy, and compulsion energy, OCD type of energy, has its roots in trauma as well. And please, when you think of OCD, stop thinking of somebody turning off a light switch 400 times or having to return to the house to check to make sure that the oven's on. That is one form of it. But a compulsion is truly where you are doing something and you are not fully in control of it. It genuinely is. It can be like when you're dating somebody and you check on them on social media a lot, or you're checking their phone, or the self-destructive.
Yeah.
That kind of, and yeah, you we both encounter that with clients. It's been a thing when yeah, exactly. It really is something that we all have to be cognizant of, that awareness is one of the things. But one of the primary reasons for doing this, and I had not asked Jacob on the podcast for a little bit because I knew you were going through a hard time, that you had gotten back from a trip, and that it just was one of those fragile times for your balance. And so We haven't been in contact very much because you were trying to get through your stuff, except for like checking in, everything was okay. And here's the hidden Cracker Jack surprise of why we self-sabotage. Because it's one of the ways we feel like we're controlling our outcomes because we go towards if you have in the past had toxic relationships to other people, to substances, to work-life balance, which is what we're talking about now, one of the reasons that you repeat that pattern isn't just that you're caught in an OCD spiral. It is because your subconscious mind is always trying to, all of us do this, put things into order. And the predictable, that's why we have so many routines in our lives, feels so much safer. Even if it has not been a healthy pattern or a healthy routine, subconsciously we are drawn back towards those routines because it's how we know how to do things and we're going towards the known. And it gives us a feeling of power in our lives that being open to the idea of being in flow and going with the changes that are brought to us does not. Because like kind of hanging out and being like, I don't know what comes next. I guess whatever's supposed to come to me leaves us on this the position of being on tenterhooks, and that it can be too much for people who have emotional issues like depression, anxiety, any of the other things that, I have an anxiety disorder, I have general anxiety disorder. I don't medicate it. I manage it through lifestyle and exercise. But as I just shared, if I do not keep an eye on that, I will go towards unhealthy habits in that and end up hurting myself as I'm trying to help myself. Because I do have that, if some is good, more must be even better. And I will begin to ignore, because I'm doing it to ignore feelings, I will begin to ignore like feedback on my body. Like, why does the car keep seem to be retreating into the distance? Because I went too far, I did too much, and my entire body was trying to tell me, you're tired to the point of it being dangerous. And that was like, you have to pay attention to your own signals. But it was fascinating to me to learn that part of the reason people engage in self-sabotaging behaviors is because at a subconscious level, it is a way of controlling what happens in their lives. And it gives them, even when it sucks, it reinforces a feeling of what we are all searching for in these patterns, which is safety. When people are self-sabotaging with substances, what they're trying to do is get away from an uncomfortable feeling. If they don't understand it, or they don't think they can fix it, or they don't think they can live with it, they're trying to medicate it away. When we have an awareness around the type of toxic or destructive substances or behaviors or habits that we might be bringing into our life, we then have to watch that even the good things can turn towards something that is compulsion that is damaging to us. And the easiest analogy, the easiest example of that is that most people who go into addiction recovery programs then have to go to meetings. And it's almost like a form of, they transfer that need and that compulsion to something safe and supportive. But then they lose their independence because unless they're checking in with their group, they don't feel safe. So it's a much healthier form of it. And the awareness that you're doing it is one of the things that helps mitigate it. And so putting some, I'm not going to say pressure, but some emphasis on the idea that it's like, I can make this decision. I'm working towards independence. That is my form of support. But a support can become a lifelong crutch if you're not aware of it. And I'm not trying to dissuade anybody from going towards addiction recovery support meetings. I'm just saying that awareness needs to be there so that it doesn't have as much power over you. So the other thing, the self-sabotaging thing that people do when they have a tendency to increase, is that they're seeking their worth in their own eyes, which is one of the things that you're doing with work, and one of the things that I was doing in, ever increasing amounts, where it stopped being about whether or not I was enjoying it and I was in a competition with myself. It is one of the ways that we try and validate ourselves, is with the ability to drive and to push, because our world values that so much. So that's yet another example of it. Jacob, what do you do when you find yourself self-sabotaging?
Uh, if I had figured it out by now, that would be lovely. Right now it's just I took maybe not the healthiest of roads to walk with this, but I kind of isolated myself over the past couple of weeks, as you have experienced, and more acutely the people in my physical sphere have experienced. It's basically just been work and home for the past like 2 months, which was helpful in a lot of ways because I wasn't putting myself in situations that would allow me, well, in certain social situations that would, allow me to self-medicate or do whatever. But it did trap me in my work cycle that was a little heavy. But I don't really have great tools at the moment. It's one of the things that I'm focusing on in therapy right now. But I like to just keep track of every day, and then whenever I feel like I need to go do something that would, feed the monster, I guess, so to speak, it's make a note of it. So I have sticky notes in my little folder on my iPad that are just filled with, dates and situations. And then I don't know, just seeing them on paper gives them kind of like a physical body. And it's easier to deal with that than an intangible feeling, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, I'm writing a lot. I find that recording things and having them in a more physical space allows me to handle them a little bit better.
That's one of the ways to keep you in touch with your inner monologue is to be able to do processing work like writing. Or if you don't like writing, I'm always telling people, please feel completely comfortable speaking aloud. Playing it into a
Mhm.
listening to it is one of the things that will keep you in touch with your emotional flow. But the first thing to recognize when you are drawn towards things that are self-sabotaging is you do need to check in with yourself because
Mhm.
it's coming from a place. It's coming from a place of your emotional needs are not being met. So you're externalizing an internal feeling where you're trying to go towards something in the external world to cope with an internal feeling that is making you feel sad or uncertain or sometimes a little bit trapped, which is like kind of what was going on with me is that like I really kind of I have a permanent injury. I have a surgically reconstructed heel that is from a car accident from kind of a long time ago. And there's a plate and 6 screws. And it took me a really, really long time to physically rehab it. And the more freedom of movement that I have been gaining, the more I keep trying to do because it's trying to break free from this permanent limitation. And when I say permanent limitation, if you met me, if you saw me, particularly if you saw me hiking, you would not think that there was anything wrong with me. But it's just it's a limited thing, and I rehabbed it a lot much better than like, I did a better job with it than I was told was possible because I didn't give up on it. I was supposed to be able to regain about 65 to 70% use of that, and I've got about 95 to 98%. It really only has one motion, it can't do side to side very easily. But that part of what I was trying to overcome with that ever increasing need to hike was a feeling of not being safe. Because having any form of physical limitation, and I'm not in a big person's body, I'm kind of small. It's like it seems to surprise people when they meet me in person. I'm about 5'3.5". I'm not a tall person. And I'm just not, I'm not big in any capacity. And that it was making me feel safer. That what I was doing in that ever increasing thing was trying to seek safety. That the idea of being having a permanent injury meant to me a permanent weakness, even though all it is a form of movement that's a little bit more difficult for me to achieve. So with journaling, that's like the most important thing you can do because it keeps you in touch with what's going on with yourself, which is actually the key to that prison is being aware of it. Because since that day coming home, that was like getting a dose of ice water right in the face when I was reading these reviews of people just kind of being like, don't turn back, warning, red flag, all over the place. And it's like, I just got back from doing that and I was aware it was pretty hard. But why didn't I turn around when it started getting really hard? Because I let
Mhm.
myself off the hook because I'm trying to prove something about overcoming limitations because it has served me well in the past. But if I don't keep a close eye on it, it turns into that self-sabotaging thing. And when I say I was fine, like I was fine after a good day of like, soaking in hot tubs and things, because I was really, 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 really sore after that. And for good reason. It genuinely was just that little bit too challenging. But it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be in that area that could also be good for you. It can be in an area where it really is self-sabotage has to do with repeating the known because we are overwhelmed by the idea of the unknown. and to treat it as
Yeah.
an issue of overwhelm. And that is one of
Mhm.
the things that can really help with it. Jacob, because you have additional challenges, like you had to have a med adjustment as well, and that's something that's kind of
Yeah.
bipolar disorder, is it not?
Did you say it was common?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think so. Yeah. For me, anecdotally speaking, yes, it's very common. I usually only get a year, 2 years, 2 to 3 years, maybe, on one little cocktail, as it were,
Mhm.
before it needs to be adjusted or completely switched. And so right now I'm on a completely switched cycle, which is interesting. Like, I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal, but my my doctor was straight up asked me if I felt comfortable doing this in an outpatient setting, and I was like, "Oh gosh, why would you ask me that?" Because yes, of course, I'm going to say yes. Like, no one wants to be inpatiented, but I don't know. It was something that I really had to do because you are talking, and now I'm thinking about more and more stuff. It's like, I've been eating the same food every day for lunch. I've started I have more compulsory behaviors than I guess realized at the beginning of this episode. So, obviously it's a necessary, but it's kind of jarring at the same time. So I'm trying to stay on top of that, and augment my work schedule every week and kind of get to that nice middle ground between overdoing it, and like losing all aspect of the outside world versus taking it too easy and therefore like getting swamped by it all.
That is what, like, when you said that, like, you realize that you're doing a couple of more things in a compulsive fashion, it's that awareness. It's like,
Mhm.
you're going to choose to do something different. And that is one of the things that when you start breaking cycles, that is what it takes. It's this disruptive energy. It's a distraction from a repeating energy signature within your life. And it has a lot of power. Like, here's the thing. If you're hearing this and you're like compulsion, you're compelled to do something, it's a form almost like a first cousin of addiction. Please stop equating that to weakness. It's not about weakness.
Mhm.
It's about how we function in cycles. Everything goes in a cycle in our world. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. Days of the month go by, days of the week go by, the hours go by. These are all cyclical things that we have learned to track our lives through. It is quite simply normal to be programmed towards doing things in a routine fashion. But when we're
Mhm.
overwhelmed by something, we are more likely to try to retreat into a pattern of the known in order to keep us safe. And sometimes it's not positive, but it's known, so it feels safe. You know, the whole saying of the devil you know. And that is one of the things
Mhm.
really help, is recognizing this is not about strength or weakness. It is about the nature of how human beings function best, which is in a routine. And that those routines can turn around and bite us in the butt because they also encompass the idea of self-sabotage and the self-fulfilling prophecy that is behind
Mhm.
the idea of self-sabotage. So, Jacob, when you're writing, what kind of things are you writing about? Are you talking to yourself about how you're feeling, what you need to do? Because journaling has been a good tool for you. So, like, what kind of things do you write about?
Yeah, like literally writing down every single thing that happened during the day. I've started now doing it bit by bit, so I will work on it all throughout the day. I was doing it just at night, but then that became too overwhelming because I was like recounting almost like the minutes of my life. So I had to learn how to stop doing that. So I do it throughout the day. I have a little clock that I put in there because most of it's digital now since I always have my little pad on me. So yeah, I just started putting a clock in there, and I'll note whenever I'm writing, and I'm basically just taking stock of my day. If I have a like strong emotional response to something, or something bad happens, or something good happens as well, I will write about and just sit there and just record it, everything that happened, how I was feeling. Why did I feel this way? What did I do with the emotion? And I I can see where that sounds really kind of obsessive and maybe not super healthy, but so far it has yielded positive results, so I'm not questioning it too deeply. It's just nice to be just like I said, like have I guess a physical representation of these really strong emotions that I've been having lately. And it makes it easier to deal with. And I can always go back and review it later. So I mean sometimes I share it with other people who maybe were in that situation with me, and to kind of give them a little more insight into how I'm dealing with the world around me in this moment, because it is vastly different than um I would say that I feel like I've had a personality shift almost, which is not true. It's just like I've not I don't know how to say what I want to say, I guess, but um like like right now, like I can't even talk to you about it without like having something in front of me to like scribble on or something, because it's like my I just can't control things the way I used to. And so yeah, I don't know, self-sabotaging.
Gives
And
you a form of focus is what it sounds like, is that when you have that compulsive energy, it gives you a productive outlet for illuminating your inner world a little bit, which your inner world is torturing you a little bit. And it doesn't sound compulsive, Jacob. What it sounds like is that, keep an eye on that, because it's a thing that's keeping you safe while you're doing that. And probably talk to your therapist
Sure.
about the worth of like, hey, should I try and not do this for a day? Because I feel like it's becoming my only coping tool. And it may not be the right time for you because you are dealing with med adjustment, which has to do with adjusting the chemicals in your brain, which, there's a reason that you only get about 2 years out of the basically the medicine cocktail,
Mhm.
is because we are ever
Yeah.
changing. Our brains are always changing. And so it works for you and it makes sense. But like what I would say to people outside of, and please keep in mind, I'm not a therapist, talk to one if you are dealing with heavy duty compulsion. Talk to a real life trained professional. They know what they're doing. This
Mm.
is kind of the observational things that have helped me break through patterns without the aid of a therapist and without the aid of external intervention, because I was able to do so. But if I wasn't, I would have gone towards those forms of help. I'm just very good at self-management because I've had to be pretty much my entire life. So you've got a self-management tool that takes that compulsive energy and turns it towards something that gives you a feeling of safety that is not destructive to your life. So it might sound
Mhm, mhm.
compulsive, but it also doesn't, it's like people who take up knitting to quit smoking. They need something
Right.
with their hands. And let's face it, like, a sweater is not going to give you lung cancer, and almost unless you're, knitting it from
Yeah.
asbestos, which please don't do.
Right.
But that's honest to goodness. Please remember that the idea of replacement therapy is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's just that you would want to eventually talk to your healthcare professional, your mental health care professional, about like, hey, at what point do I need to be concerned about this because I'm doing it all day long? And it's something called
Mhm.
stimming, which is a form of letting out some energy. And you're very well aware of that because you have ADHD. And I do it with cards sometimes where like I am shuffling like at the beginning of the day. I don't do it all the time any longer. I made sure to like break up that pattern. I look into my life for patterns and I make sure that I break them
Mhm.
order to make sure, because I am prone to OCD. And it does come from, I have a complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's very, very common to have a form of OCD as a trauma survivor because it does make you neurodivergent. It's just a form of neurodivergence that you can actually resolve through awareness. So if you're going to have a form of neurodivergence, like it's probably the best one to have, I suppose, because as is the key to the door and get you out of that. But that's what I have to do, is I like the things that I do that help me tap into my emotional monologue, my emotional dialogue within, to keep me aware of what need I'm trying to meet through the behaviors, the self-sabotaging behaviors that I might engage in. And again, I really get it that like, listening to somebody talk about how they like, I took this really challenging 14-mile hike and boy, was I sore for it. Like, that's what you consider self-sabotage? These days, sure, but when I was younger, it could take all forms of like self-medicating that like I always had a hard time understanding it because I am able to stop whatever I'm doing. I am able to
Mhm.
And I don't crave it afterwards. Like I recognize it as a toxic substance and something that got out of control in my life, and I just kind of don't do it. But I have to be very aware of it. Awareness for me has been the thing that breaks those patterns. So
Mhm.
if you're engaging in self-sabotage, whether it's the mild form of what we're talking about, which is the societally encouraged overwork, the idea that like you're always in a contest with yourself when you're doing any form of physical activity. The ever increasing levels is one of the hallmarks of self-sabotage, is that understanding that, seeing that, and your path towards getting out of a self-sabotaging cycle is awareness, and
Mhm.
replace maybe destructive with something that is more productive. And that's what journaling is for you. It doesn't sound compulsive to me. It sounds like you have an energy and you have found a channel for it that is the thing that is more productive for you. And that the only thing that, like, when we're talking that I kind of spotted is that you're talking about you're writing down everything that happened in your day, and probably to kind of gain that level of awareness to step outside the pattern would be to really talk more to yourself about how it made you feel and how you coped with those feelings, because that starts giving you a
Yeah.
starts giving you a grander view. Um, Jacob, you have struggled with substance abuse, with alcohol, and with drugs in the past.
Mhm.
Do you understand what was your catalyst for that? Do you know what your triggers were? Because that's the other thing is identifying what your triggers are can be the thing that, and being prepared for the, I typically will go home and eat the refrigerator or whatever your self-sabotaging behavior is around
Mhm.
stress, being aware of the trigger of stress or the trigger of too much pressure being put on you, or the trigger around like a feeling of insecurity can be another one.
No, yeah, that was a huge one for me as well. Like the stress from work was, I mean, so it's weird. It's like when I started drinking, I just went head first into it, like from day one almost. And I went to college in a place where it was a heavy drinking culture. I come from a family that is not necessarily, light drinkers either, and so it was always something that was very present and did not feel out of place in my world. And so recognizing that I was problem drinking to begin with was a huge struggle. But any kind of large emotion, it didn't matter if it was quote unquote positive or negative. Anytime I felt big feelings, I would find a reason to drink about it. Most of the time, it was insecure, like you said, insecurity right at the end. And as I look back on it, a lot of it was based in that low self esteem, insecure person that I was for the majority of my life. And then once I started gaining, more of those, self-positive feelings, like the drinking never really went away. I just replaced it with, instead of just being sad and drinking, then I was just like, that's how it was fun. And that's how everyone like had fun with me. And I just kind of built my personality around it, which was kind of strange, I guess, looking back on it. But yeah, I didn't really need a trigger. It was like kind of the biggest problem for me was like I was fine one second, then I wasn't fine the next, and there couldn't be or no reason for it. It was just a Tuesday, So I don't know.
Having known you for a while now, because we've known each other for like 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
that I noticed is that when you have a feeling of failure on around anything is when you're
Hmm.
very likely to do the nosedive type of energy into
Sure.
whatever substance, because it's a form of escapism, getting away from an uncomfortable feeling. But what you're also
Hmm.
doing is something that people need to be aware of, overwhelming feelings, which
Hmm.
can joy,
Yeah.
which they can include
Hmm.
joy. It's why people at weddings have a tendency to get plastered.
Yeah.
Alcohol is a toxin, guys. Like I don't personally drink, but I did used to drink. I because I was trying to heal so many things after a traumatic marriage, it was just not a healthy habit for me. And when I didn't do it for a long time, I had an occasion where I was like, okay, I'll make a rule where I'll only drink to celebrate. And I did that. And it was like fun for like 10 minutes. And then I was like, you know what I wish? I wish that I was sober right this moment, because it impeded more things than it helped.
Hmm.
That it
No.
was like, it was kind of like, this is not actually a positive feeling for me. I wonder why I did it at different points of my life. And it was because I was trying to escape from the reality of a bad marriage. And so, it was a form of self-medication. That, and like, it was one of my emotional management tools that, like, it allowed me to be in the energy that my, punishing ex-husband would approve of. I wasn't allowed to have negative emotions. And so I happen to be somebody who has to be, like, is a overall positive drinker when I do drink. I'm not somebody who ends up crying usually. And usually, I mean, probably in the last, it's been many, many years since I remember drinking and having it result in tears. Probably all the way back in college. So I'm not that person. It usually makes me release or ignore the negative feelings that I'm having and go towards the more positive experience. But that's not permanent.
Mhm.
It's actually an overall central nervous depressant. And I have a
Mhm.
tendency towards depression. And so it just kind of wasn't serving me. One of the things
Mhm.
that people do when we're, because it's not just about substances, it's not just about work, it can be about repeating patterns with a type of person and a type of relationship. And one of the most frequent things I ever read was, is he your type or is he your pattern? And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
because when you can recognize a pattern, everything being cyclical in the idea of self-sabotage, pattern recognition is one of the keys to being able to break free from a pattern of self-destruction, which is what self-sabotage is. And the other thing is self-sabotage is a self-esteem issue where you don't think you really deserve the good stuff. You don't think you deserve the this, the that, the happy, the good relationships. So you go towards people who are emotionally punishing. I went towards
Yeah.
people who were very much like my parents. And I've covered a little bit just how they were. And like, it makes perfect sense. We all do it, by the way. And like, when you have super toxic parents, like, you might be drawn to people who are very toxic. And it's not that you have self-loathing issues. It's that in that cyclical patterning that we do, I was trying to seek a different outcome with the same type of personality. And didn't get it. But I actually did get it because as an adult, I found out I was the person with the control and I could simply leave behind a toxic relationship, which is what I did.
Mhm.
Um, so that idea of it being related to when we make relationship choices, it's starting to question, because it happens to people in relationships almost more than it does with substances, because we have an infrastructure in support when it comes to substances. There are steps you can take, there are professionals you can go to. But if your pattern is around self-sabotaging or self-destructive relationships, where you choose people who are emotionally unavailable or repeating a pattern, or who are people who are delivering to you the same outcome over and over again in the self-sabotaging way, the only thing that will help with that is healing, learning to speak to yourself kindly, being aware of what you're doing. But when you're aware of it, instead of being like, oh, I'm screwing up again, I'm just doing this pattern, like when we're talking about your journaling, you're like, you started self-judging is the thing that I
Mhm.
noticed. Like, you're talking about is like, dude, don't judge yourself. It's actually really working for you. But that's the other thing to be aware of, is catching yourself in the self-judgment. And whenever you
Yeah.
find
Mhm.
one
Mhm.
negative thing to yourself about what you're doing, say 3 positive things. Tell
Yep.
yourself proud of at least 3 things that you're proud of, even if it's small, even if it would look tiny to somebody else. Like, if, like for me, as instance, for using ourselves as examples is the easiest way to do
Hmm.
that. With the anxiety disorder, I have a lot of fear-related things around completely normal stuff. I didn't touch my computer or my cards for 2 days over the weekend because I try to do that. Like, I try to break these patterns. It also gives me a chance to recharge. It gives me a chance to refocus on other things. I read, I watched some movies. I read some books. I had a couple of chats with friends, that type of thing. So it wasn't like I was just sitting there going, I really wish I could go work. But when I came in this morning, I was afraid, because I am, I do read tarot for a living. I frequently do know what's going to happen. I knew that when I tried to boot up my computer, something would have gone wrong. And and I was right. It had to be rebooted. But the way my heart was hammering when that was happening, like something dire was on the line, is how I learned how to talk to myself. That is a form of self-sabotaging, having a disproportionate response, understanding that I'm having a disproportionate response. And then if I continue with it, trying to ignore it, just trying to get through it, kind of being ashamed of it, that it's not going to get better. So instead, I just kind of talked to myself about like, see, everything's fine. It's okay. You do know things before they happen. It doesn't mean that everything is doom. It's not the sword of Damocles. And then I talked to myself about like some of the stresses that came over the weekend, which included my dog projectile vomiting, which I'm a sympathy puker. And so it can be hard on me when that happens, but I handled it really well. And that was one of the things I was talking to myself about. As I was afraid, I started talking to myself about the 3 things that I had done recently where I'm like, you handled that really, really well and in an ever increasingly healthy energy. And that's what I did, was that when something was going on that I might typically be like, because nobody wants a disorder, but what I'm discussing is this disproportionate fear response I was having to something absolutely mundane. It must have been a brownout at some point, and so my computer required a reboot. And I need you to understand something. I have 2 backup devices that are incredibly reliable. If there's something really wrong with this computer, I can switch to another device. So I logically know this part, but there is still a part of me that's like, catastrophe, failure. Oh my God, the repair bill, I'll have to buy a new machine. It goes from 0 to everything being catastrophic if I don't keep an eye on it, but I'm aware of that. I'm aware of it. And so as it started to happen, that's when I came in with the subscript of how to talk to myself when I feel that way, is refocus your energy. It's not about denial. It's about choosing a more productive manner of approaching things with, it's okay, even if it is broken, you know where you can get it fixed. You have 2 backup devices. You did this really well. You did that really well. Look at all the progress that you've made. And will I talk to myself almost in new statements? Absolutely, because I'm reprogramming my internal voice. Your inner voice, it was programmed into you by your caretakers when you were small. If you have a habit of not addressing yourself properly or kindly, you may have had a punishing caretaker. You may have had a difficult social experience in school, which is the other thing. Because some people are like, no, my parents were lovely. It's like, well, were you bullied? Because that frequently, sensitive people are often the victims of bullying. Because that's the other thing that can start teaching you to approach yourself as if you're not doing anything correctly, and counteracting it with when you're feeling afraid, start talking to yourself about how brave you are. Like, you did this and that was really brave. You did that and that was really brave. And go ahead and use you statements, because you're trying to learn self-comforting techniques that were not part of your formative experience. And what does this have to do with self-sabotage? It's the thing that makes you step back from the ledge when you're about to jump over it. It is the repatterning, because when we are self-sabotaging, we are repeating a destructive pattern. And the best way to get out of that is to find your productive patterning and go towards it instead. And if it feels too awkward to you to talk to yourself like you're a little kid you're encouraging, then find what your productive pattern is. But that's what helps with self-sabotage, is recognizing it within yourself without judgment or shame. Please don't be ashamed of it. It's a normal human response. It's just something that got out of control in you, is that you were trying to make yourself feel better with something that became worse and worse. In the instance of toxic relationships, you are repeating a pattern. You're repeating a pattern, seeking a better outcome, but it's like trying to bake a cake with the same crappy ingredients. It's like, why does this always turn out like a cow pie? It's like, well, because you're putting manure into it. And so you kind of have to start choosing what you allow into your life, what you allow into your thought process. And this is not about emotional repression. It is about recognizing as valid the fear that you're having, but that telling yourself you can cope with it. Repression will always lead towards a form of self-medication that is about trying to distract yourself from the feeling. Recognize the feeling, understand that it's valid, where it's coming from. In your case, it is because you have a permanent imbalance in your brain chemistry, which, again, nobody wants a disorder, but a lot of us have them. And learning how to cope with it and to care for it like it is something that you love about yourself as much as you love the parts that you approve of. Like, you're social and people approve of you and you're everybody's bestie sometimes. Like, you're this person who's really, like, you get a lot of positive feedback in your personality. So it's like, talk to yourself about, like, that's not a lie. That's just another part of you, is re-emphasizing where you're putting your focus on that after recognizing what's going on that is making you step up to that ledge and going, screw it, I'll just drink the bottle of Jack Daniels, or I'll just run away from my feelings and go and leap up a mountain and ignore the fact that it's like,
Mhm.
there's a point, and anybody who's hiked that is like, I know what point you're talking to, because it really is like, I had to stop for a moment and really calculate. Getting up something is easy because it's just strength. Getting down something is balance and agility. And it can also really get out of control with gravity. So every time I'm about to
Yeah.
difficult, I have to figure out what the plan is to get down. And the red flag I completely ignored was there was an obstacle, an obstruction in my path. When I looked at it, I could not figure out for a solid 2 minutes. It's like, how am I going to get down that?
Mm.
How am I going to get down that? And I finally figured it out. Like I had to go to the side, and there was like, it's a long story, but I should have stopped there. I should have given myself permission to be like, hey, you're like, nobody's clocking this. This is not, you're trying to earn your health or your worth. You're supposed to be doing this for enjoyment. Putting your neck in that much peril shouldn't be that enjoyable. I should have stopped myself. And I did. It's just that I completed that whole thing, came home and had to see external evidence of other people validating my experience, which is which when you have an anxiety disorder, when you have a tendency towards, if you have PTSD, if you have like, we have a tendency to assign everything to it. Like, because part of me being like, that is scary, is like, well, I have an anxiety disorder and I must choose to be endlessly brave. And instead, getting home and seeing all these other people being like, turn back, oh my God, get the holy water, don't do it, really was the thing that finally made me go, oh, I invalidate my feelings sometimes as a way of coping with them, assigning
Mhm.
disorder rather than
Mhm.
maybe that is your survival instinct. I heard somebody on TikTok talking about how a certain breed of dog has the survival instinct of a croissant. And I was like, yeah, that's about right. Like I have the survival instinct there of a croissant. Like I really was not thinking it through. But, I'm this very protective person. It all worked out really well. I got home, I learned the lesson, and now I'm sharing it with you all. Is being able to, if you are struggling with things, understand that keeping that perspective, if it may be informed by that, is important, but to always pass it through is it reasonable? Is this also a logical fear? Because I have an anxiety disorder, I can put fear down to all of them being irrational or illogical. But I should have caught myself when I'm standing there staring at a big pile of rocks, wondering how I was ever going to get down it in one piece. I was like, I can go up
Yep.
it, but getting down of it, it's like, what if there's not a loop trail on the other side? I could be doomed. And that is the point at which I should have, by any reasonable standard, said, turn your butt around and go back the way you came. But I couldn't. I have a tendency I go towards completion. I feel like I failed if I haven't completed something. Giving up on something I have learned to equate with failure. And
Mhm.
so understanding that part, awareness of whatever it is you are doing, if you are repeating, going towards the wrong types of people, the type of people who ghost or emotionally unavailable, or who don't want to settle down with one partner, ask yourself, what am I repeating and why am I repeating it? And then without unkindness or judgment of self, talk to yourself about why you're doing that. What part of your self-worth you're trying to earn in your own eyes when it comes to things like overwork. Because like you said, you switched to doing something where you're very, very focused on work, which will burn you out. It will burn you out. Any form
Mhm.
of perfectionism will burn you out on whatever it is you're doing. Jacob, do you have any like thoughts to share about how people can cope with their tendencies towards self-sabotage beyond the very obvious of like, hey, understand that this is pretty common, so quit judging yourself for it. Quit judging yourself and go towards understanding. And that's one of the easiest keys towards getting out of that, locked into behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, you've really just touched on all the things that I normally do. The recognition of patterns is the big one for me. Is like I that's why I write everything down now, because I've just noticed that in the past people have had to tell me what's happening rather than me knowing what was happening, and so I could be 3 weeks in, and then someone finally is like, hey, by the way, I've noticed blah blah blah. I'm like, oh great, I could have noticed that myself if I had been doing X, Y, or Z. um I don't just taking regular stock of what's going on and being able to notice changes in behavior has been super helpful for me. Um, I wish I would have learned this like, 5 years ago. Could have made things a little bit easier, but I don't know. I have good reasons now to try to stay on top of things, and not that I didn't before, but I don't know. Um, I don't just take a minute at the end of your day or to start of your day, even if you're a morning person. I am not. I have to do mine at the end, but just take stock of your day more, and you just try to recognize patterns where they start to show up.
And it's excellent advice though, is you know how in like, smoking cessation, people quitting smoking, like sometimes they'll tell people to have a band that they snap on their wrist
Yeah.
as a form of distraction whenever they feel like smoking. It's a little bit like that, is that, you take stock of yourself, stop at the beginning of your day and like kind of look over what you're thinking of doing and find the one thing that you should change.
Yeah, I mean, a physical activity is really great for that. I don't respond well to it. Like, there's not anything that I've found that I can do, like a repetitive anything that I can do that helps me focus like that. That's why I write. That's why I write. So, or like
But you like
a
it's already
coloring
like
sheet or
part of it
something.
that you can do that already is choose to eat something different.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. And I should probably follow my own advice and not eat that same pepperoni pizza that I've eaten for the past 3 weeks every single day. But I'm not there yet. But I will. Maybe this is my week.
And it's cool, like to respect your limitations around because you go through these cycles and you are dealing with a med adjustment. But
Well, yeah, and well, it's like that's where mine comes from the most is not feeling like I I try to take control of what I can because I feel like I'm out of control. I don't have control over anything else, and that's just like I'm never going to be good enough to do X, Y, or Z, and I don't know. So gotta stay on top of that.
so to sum up on self-sabotage, it's a weird form of seeking safety in the known, even when it's self
Hmm.
even when it reinforces your negative narrative within. It is dealing with the known, it is seeking safety in the known. And one of the most effective tools towards breaking these patterns is to remind yourself that your safety does not reside in your habits, it resides in your approach. And so that it is an internal thing that keeps you safe, how you feel about your life, how you feel about yourself, how you feel about your abilities, that your safety is actually an internal mechanism. And that if you're trying to externalize in patterns, it is a call to look within to find the emotional need that you are having that you have not figured out how to meet yourself and how to
Hmm.
talk yourself through. And like sometimes if it's not truly destructive, like, don't worry too much about it. Like eating a pepperoni pizza, I'm sure there's a cardiac surgeon out there that's like, that is highly destructive. Like
Right.
within moderation, it's okay, guys. It's okay to indulge. Is examine the patterns that you are engaging in, because I still, every day that I do work, I have a form of clearing. There's a way that I ground, there's a way that I connect. It is okay to have routines and patterns, but to examine when you are engaged in why do I keep doing the things that are bad for me? Find a pattern to change, whether it's that you shower at a different point, you go out, you get a different form of shampoo, you change something, because it is one of the things that will break that cycle. And remember, you're caught in an energetic loop when you are self-sabotaging. And so that you almost like, it's like you want to throw a circuit breaker. And that's what making a meaningful and productive change. And it starts with how you talk to yourself, which is please stop being unkind to yourself if you do these things. It's so deeply human. All you are is human.
Hmm.
You're just being a human being when you are accidentally doing the things that being your own worst enemy instead of your own best friend. But in that sentence is the actual remedy for self-sabotage, is find the way to be your honest best friend. Because sometimes I have to call myself on stuff like, why you do everything to extremes? You're going to end up hurting yourself if you don't back off of this. What are you doing? I'm always trying to earn my worth by ever increasing ability. And it comes from having punishing caretakers. And I know that part. But once I know it, I'm far more likely to speak kindly to myself about it and to take the step of breaking the pattern. And
Hmm.
break your routines with something productive and healthful. if at all possible. But do know that if you have been engaging in self-destructive patterns, it is not because you are broken, you're not good enough. It is because you did not learn the correct things yet, but you can be your best teacher, your own mentor, and your best friend with your inner dialogue and how you talk to yourself about that. And you do not have to tell yourself you're perfect and that you never do anything wrong. We can be authentic with ourselves and kind. You can talk, because
Yeah.
like I can be stubborn to the point of, oh my God, I'm my own worst enemy. But it also is the thing that gives me that stick-to-itiveness. Like in that which makes you awesome can also make you suck, but it does not mean
Right.
it is always about sucking. It really is. It's like that thing that I do really well that it causes for achievement can also have a counterbalancing energy that I need to be aware of, and I need to be kind to myself about it, because particularly when it comes to self-sabotaging with substances, people are trying to escape their negative feelings, sometimes over
Mhm.
or their feelings of overwhelm. So that was, we need to get Jacob out of here because he has an appointment right after this. So that was Logical Magic, Self-Sabotage, how to stop doing it, why we do it. It's a normal thing. Be kind to yourself about it and find the help that you can find. And speaking of that, if you want to book me for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session, you can do that at therisingmoon.com. It's the only way to book me. You can find me at Chromecast at The Rising Moon on YouTube as well, where there's a bunch of free readings. You can find me here at Logical Magic, and then I have a Patreon, etc. I talked about this at the start of the show. You can find Jacob at Southern Style Readings on Facebook. You can find him at southernstylereadings@gmail.com. Remember, the form of help that is right for you is the one that you should go towards. And if you need therapy, there are a lot of really good therapists. And one of the best things about the pandemic is that it made it very normal to meet with people electronically. So you are no longer contained only within your geographic area. Psychology
Mhm.
Today in the back has it, go to their website, they have a therapist finder. There are ways to find help if you are dealing with self-destructive patterns that are beyond your ability to perform self-intervention with. Seek help for it, seek groups. Remember, you're not alone in this, and you're worth the effort of saving yourself. Take care, be well, and I will see you next time.